Francis Winslow arrived at Winterbourne Hall on the last afternoon of September to the sight of a governess's trunk sailing out of a second-floor window and bursting open in the drive, scattering petticoats and a hairbrush across the gravel like the aftermath of a small domestic explosion. The woman herself followed a moment later, not thrown, but fleeing, weeping into a handkerchief as she climbed into a waiting hired chaise and did not look back once at the house she was leaving. Frances stepped over a stray stocking, straightened her bonnet, and continued up the front steps as though this were an entirely ordinary way to begin a position. She was 3 steps from the door when she heard the voices, a study window standing ajar to the left, 2 men's voices pitched for privacy and failing at it. £100 says she lasts a fortnight, said one voice, older, dry with long acquaintance. The last one managed 11 days. That was a personal best. £100 says she is gone by spring, said the second voice, and something in its flatness told Frances this was not amusement but resignation dressed as wager. Give her the full run of the house, Corbyn, change nothing on her account. If she has the constitution to survive this family as it actually is, she will have earned the position. If she does not, and she will not, I would rather know it in October than in June, when the children have grown attached to someone else who intends to leave them. Francis Winslow stood very still on the top step of Winterbourne Hall, £100 and a season's worth of doubt hanging in the autumn air above her head, and decided, with the particular calm of a woman who had been underestimated a great many times before and outlasted every instance of it, that she would take considerable pleasure in losing that bet for both of them. She rang the bell herself rather than wait to be announced. The housekeeper who answered, a stout, harried woman named Mrs. Fitch, looked at her with the weary sympathy of someone greeting a lamb bound for slaughter. "You'll be the new governess then, I won't lie to you, miss. The last one didn't last past luncheon on her second day. There's a snake got loose in the schoolroom most weeks. The young master delights in setting fire to things he oughtn't, and his Grace," she lowered her voice as though the house itself might overhear, "his Grace does not make it easy on any of them. Doesn't mean to, I don't think. But he doesn't make it easy." "I did not come here expecting easy, Mrs. Fitch," Frances said. "I came here expecting children who have lost their mother and father within 2 years and have not yet been permitted to feel steady about anything since. I intend to become the thing that does not move, no matter what is thrown at it, including snakes, fire, and, I gather, wages." She handed over her single travel case. "Please have someone see to my trunk. I believe there is a spring assignation His Grace and I have already made without either of us properly being introduced." Her trunk, when it was finally retrieved from the mud, proved to contain rather less than she had hoped, 1 hairbrush lost entirely to the gravel, and a good half of her linens in need of laundering before she could properly unpack. A small, practical indignity that she noted without complaint, the same way she noted everything in that first hour, cataloguing rather than despairing. Mrs. Fitch showed her to a modest chamber overlooking the east garden, apologising twice for its plainness, before Frances assured her, truthfully, that she had slept in considerably worse rooms in service to considerably less interesting households. She was presented to the Duke of Winterbourne formally an hour later, through Mrs. Fitch, as propriety demanded, in a study that smelled of ink and neglected correspondence. Alistair Vane was younger than she had expected from the tiredness in his voice through the window, perhaps 34, dark-haired, with the particular stillness of a man who had trained himself out of showing what he felt about anything. He looked at her the way a man looks at a bill he expects to be unable to pay. "Miss Winslow." "I understand, Mrs. Fitch has given you the honest accounting of this household." She has, Your Grace. I understand you have already given Mr. Corbin a rather less flattering one in the sum of £100 wagered against my surviving to spring. She watched something flicker behind his composure, not quite embarrassment, more the recalibration of a man realizing his study window did not, in fact, muffle sound as well as he had assumed. I do not take it as an insult. I take it as a term of my employment, and I intend to hold you to losing it. For a moment he only looked at her. Then, astonishingly, something that was almost a laugh escaped him before he could master it back into stillness. You are either very confident, Miss Winslow, or you have not yet met my nephew Thomas. I have met a great many Thomases in my career, Your Grace. I have yet to meet one who could outlast a governess who does not frighten. She did not yet know what had put that terrible stillness in him, the careful distance he kept from his own household, as though warmth itself were a debt he could no longer afford to owe. She only knew, standing in that ink-smelling study, with a wager hanging unspoken between them, that whatever had made this man decide the surest kindness he could offer 3 grieving children was to expect nothing good to last. She intended to prove him wrong about that most of all. The children met her the way the house had warned her they would. Beatrice, 10 and fiercely guarded, looked at her with open calculation, clearly deciding how quickly this one, too, could be made to leave. Thomas, 7, had a garter snake named Wellington coiled in his coat pocket, which he produced within the first 5 minutes as a test Francis declined, calmly, to fail. Henry, 5 and still too young to have fully understood what had happened to his parents, simply attached himself to her skirts within the hour and refused, for reasons no one could persuade him out of, to let go. Wellington bit the last one, Thomas informed her, watching for her reaction with the particular hunger of a child who has learned that driving people away is safer than watching them choose to stay. Wellington may bite me as well, if he likes, Francis said, taking the snake from his hands with a steadiness that made Thomas's eyes widen. But I should warn you both, I have handled far worse than a garter snake in my previous positions, and none of it persuaded me to leave early. I find, on the whole, that the trying is more interesting than the leaving. By the time the first frost arrived, she had learnt the shape of the household's chaos well enough to recognise when it was accidental and when it was not. The accidental chaos she managed without difficulty, 3 motherless children testing the boundaries of a new arrival the way children always did, in the particular, unrelenting way of the recently and violently bereaved. The other chaos, the chaos that arrived in small, precisely timed disruptions, a lesson plan gone missing from her own desk, a promised half-day suddenly rescinded by the Duke, without explanation, a tutor's letter of reference mysteriously delayed a fortnight, she began to suspect was not accidental at all. She raised it with him directly in November, in the corridor outside the schoolroom, because she had never yet met an obstacle she thought better handled by silence. Your Grace, I have now had 3 separate arrangements undone within a day of my making them, each time by your own hand rather than any servant's. I am not so foolish as to think it coincidence. He did not deny it, which told her more than a denial would have. I did not do it out of cruelty, Miss Winslow. I did not accuse you of cruelty. I accused you of testing me, which is a different failing, and I think one you are rather more ashamed of. She watched the shot land. You wager on how long I will last, and then you quietly arrange the conditions to make certain you win. I begin to wonder, Your Grace, whether you have ever once let a person survive this household without deciding in advance that they would not. The last 11 did not survive it, he said, low, and I did not arrange a single one of their departures. They left because 3 children who have buried both their parents inside of 2 years are difficult to love, Miss Winslow, and difficult people get left. I have simply learned to expect the leaving before it costs anyone more than it must. Then you have built a house that punishes people for staying as thoroughly as it punishes them for going, she said, and you have mistaken that for protection. It is not protection, Your Grace. It is a wager you have rigged so that you can never lose it, because losing it would mean admitting someone finally stayed. She did not wait for his answer. She turned and went back into the schoolroom, where Henry was waiting to show her a drawing of a house with too many windows, and left the Duke standing alone in the corridor with a particular expression of a man who has just been diagnosed by someone he had not expected to see him so clearly. The wager itself became, over the following weeks, an open if unspoken fact of the household. One, Mr. Corbin referenced with visible relish whenever the Duke was safely out of earshot. His Grace tells me you have a fondness for shipping routes, Miss Winslow, the steward remarked one afternoon, finding her in the estate office consulting an old atlas for Beatrice's lesson. I confess I have begun to hope you win. £100 is a great deal of money to lose, but I find I would rather lose it to a governess who stays than win it from one who goes. It was, Frances realised, the first entirely kind thing anyone in the household besides the children had said to her since her arrival, and she treasured it accordingly. Winter deepened, and so, against every arrangement he had quietly tried to unmake, did her hold on the household. She found the schoolroom's neglected globe and taught Beatrice the shipping routes her own father had once traced for her as a girl, an unlikely kinship that thawed something guarded in the child by January. She discovered Thomas's fire setting was less mischief than a boy's desperate way of recreating the hearth his mother used to sit beside, and gave him a small, safe brazier of his own to tend under supervision, which did more to settle him than any scolding had. She learned that Henry slept better with a particular lullaby. One Mrs. Fitch remembered the late Lady Charlotte humming, and she sang it to him every night without being asked, until the nursery, which had rung with nightmares for 2 years, began, cautiously, to go quiet before midnight. It was Beatrice who first showed her the locked music room in February, sneaking her down a corridor no one used anymore. Mother's pianoforte is in there. Uncle Alistair had it locked the week after the funeral. He said no one was to play it. Beatrice's voice had the particular flatness of a child repeating a rule she resented and had never questioned aloud. I think he's afraid of it. Frances did not press the lock, that first time. She only stood in the corridor with Beatrice a long moment, looking at a door that held a woman's whole unfinished life inside it, and understood that whatever the Duke had built this household to survive, it was not simply grief. It was the particular terror of a man who had already lost people he loved, and had decided the only defence left to him was to make certain he never again allowed himself to be so thoroughly undone by losing someone new. The first crack came at a dinner in February, a small gathering of neighbouring gentry the Duke had been persuaded into hosting for the first time since his brother's death. The long dining room's dust sheets removed for the occasion, and its silver polished by a staff, visibly relieved to have some ordinary business to attend to at last. Frances had spent the preceding fortnight coaching Beatrice through the particular etiquette of a first formal appearance at her uncle's table, and the girl had taken to it with a fierce, quiet pride that Frances suspected had less to do with manners than with being trusted, for the first time in 2 years, to sit among adults rather than be shut away from them. It was into this fragile, hard-won ordinariness that his cousin Reginald Ashcombe arrived uninvited but entirely unsurprised to be admitted. Reginald was a broad, affable man, with a way of laughing just a beat too loud, and Frances disliked him within the first 5 minutes on instinct alone, well before she had any evidence to justify it. "The famous Miss Winslow," he said over the soup, with the particular warmth of a man complimenting someone he intends to undermine. "Winterbourne's longest surviving governess in 2 years. The household must find you a great relief, cousin, after so much instability." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Thomas, seated further down the table, with ink still faintly staining one knuckle from an afternoon's lesson. One does worry, of course, whether a house so recently proven unfit to hold a staff might not also prove unfit to hold 3 children much longer. Chancery does take an interest, eventually, in wards whose guardians cannot keep a governess past a fortnight. His Grace has kept this one considerably longer than a fortnight, Mr. Ashcombe, Frances said evenly, which I understand rather undercuts the argument you appear to be building toward, whatever it is. Something shuttered briefly behind Reginald's affable face, the look of a man whose opening gambit has been named aloud before he intended it to be. "I build toward nothing, Miss Winslow. I merely observe, as any concerned relation might, that 3 children who have lost so much deserve a settled household, and I have not always been convinced this one qualifies." He smiled at the table generally. "But I am glad to be proven mistaken, if I am." Later, in the corridor, Alistair, she corrected herself, still unused to intimacy even in thought, caught her elbow before she reached the stairs. "You should not have answered him so directly at my table. I would answer him the same in front of the king, your Grace. He was testing whether I would flinch in front of witnesses, the same as you tested me in October, and I find I have grown rather tired of being tested by every man in this family." She turned to face him fully in the dim corridor. "Your cousin means to have the children removed from your guardianship. I do not yet know why, but I know the shape of that particular hunger when I see it, and I think you know it too, and I think you have been too consumed by testing me to notice him testing you." He went very still. "Reginald has wanted the children's trust administered by a more reliable hand since Edmund died. He has said as much, in gentler words, more than once." His jaw tightened. "I did not think he would move against me openly." "Then it is fortunate," she said, "that one of us was watching him instead of watching me," and left him standing in the corridor with the second uncomfortable truth she had handed him in 4 months. The almost came in March, in the locked music room, which she had at last persuaded him to open, not for her sake, he insisted, but because Henry had begun asking after his mother's songs and Frances had argued, gently and repeatedly, that a locked door taught a child grief was something to be shut away rather than survived. He unlocked it himself, one evening after the children were abed, and stood in the doorway a long moment before he could bring himself to cross the threshold. "She used to play in the evenings," he said, into the dust-quiet room, moonlight falling across a pianoforte gone silent for 2 years. "Edmund would sing, badly, and she would laugh at him, and I used to sit just there," he nodded toward a window seat, "and think, I had never in my life seen 2 people so unreasonably happy." His voice roughened. "I was in London when the carriage went down the Alderbrook Road. I had postponed my own visit home by 4 days over a matter of correspondence that meant nothing at all. And by the time I arrived, there was only the funeral left to attend." "That is not a debt you owe them, your Grace," Frances said quietly, crossing the room to stand beside him. "A postponed letter did not overturn that carriage. I know that, in the part of my mind that reasons. The rest of me has built an entire house around not knowing it." He looked at her then, really looked, in the moonlight through dust-fogged glass, and reached out to brush a strand of hair from her cheek with a care that undid, in a single motion, every careful distance he had maintained since October. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she felt her breath go entirely unsteady, felt the whole unbearable nearness of him crowding out every reasonable thought in her head, and then, from 2 floors above, Henry's voice came calling down the stairwell, frightened by a dream, and the Duke's hand fell away as though he had been burned, and the moment collapsed into the ordinary business of comforting a child, leaving Frances standing alone among moonlit dust, with her pulse going like a struck bell and the ghost of an almost kiss she would carry for a long while after. The detonation came in April, when Reginald Ashcombe's solicitor arrived at Winterbourne Hall with a formal notice, a petition before the Court of Chancery, alleging that the Duke's guardianship of his late brother's children had proven materially unfit, citing 11 governesses dismissed or fled within 2 years. An undisclosed sum of the children's trust income redirected toward household experiments of dubious educational value. Frances's brazier for Thomas, her books for Beatrice, her singing lessons for Henry, each recast as evidence of mismanagement rather than care, and requesting the court transfer guardianship and control of the £20,000 trust their mother had left them to Mr. Reginald Ashcombe pending review. He does not want the children, Frances said, reading the petition twice to be certain she had not misjudged its cruelty. He wants the £20,000 a guardian is entitled to manage, and the yearly commission that comes with managing it. I know precisely what he wants, Alistair said, and for the first time since she had known him, his composure did not merely crack, it fell away entirely, revealing a man genuinely, visibly at a loss. And I do not know how to fight him, without the very chaos he has cited as evidence testifying against me in open court. Every governess who left, every incident Beatrice or Thomas caused before you came, it will all be read aloud before a commissioner as proof I cannot be trusted with 3 children I would die rather than fail. Then we will not let it be read alone. Frances said, we will read it beside everything that has happened since. 11 governesses in 2 years, yes, and one who has stayed 7 months and intends to stay a great many more, if you would only stop arranging for me to fail. She caught his hands, steadying them by main force. You have spent so long expecting to lose everyone you love that you built this house to make certain of it. I am telling you now, Your Grace, that the wager is over. I have already won it. The only question left is whether you intend to admit that, or whether you mean to let your cousin take these children rather than admit a governess proved you wrong. He looked at her a long moment, something in him finally, visibly breaking open. I do not know how to stop expecting to lose you too. Then stop testing me long enough to notice I am not leaving, she said, and start fighting for something you have decided, in advance, not to lose. A Chancery Commissioner arrived to inspect the household a fortnight later, at Reginald's specific and pointed request, timed. Frances discovered only afterward, to coincide with a day Reginald had arranged in advance through a bribed under-footman, releasing the dogs into the nursery corridor an hour before the visit, upending an inkwell across the schoolroom's newly ordered lesson books, and ensuring the Commissioner arrived to a scene of precisely the chaos Reginald's petition had described. For 20 minutes it seemed the visit might undo 7 months of careful, patient order in a single afternoon. The Commissioner's pen scratching notes with an expression that promised nothing good for the family. Frances did not panic. She gathered the children calmly, set Thomas to demonstrating the brazier's safe operation rather than hiding it, had Beatrice recite the shipping routes she had mastered, sang Henry's lullaby herself when the boy, overwhelmed, began to cry in front of the stranger, and stood, afterward, before the commissioner and stated plainly that a house that had survived the deaths of 2 parents and 11 governesses without losing a single child to despair was not a house in crisis. It was a house that had been tested nearly past bearing and had held. It was not enough. The commissioner's report, filed 3 days later, remained ambivalent, and Reginald pressed his advantage with a second, sharper filing alleging Frances herself was an unqualified and improperly engaged influence over the children, unrelated by blood or contract of sufficient standing to justify her continued presence. A filing that threatened to have her removed from the household entirely before the matter could even reach a full hearing. Alistair, faced with the possibility that keeping her in the house might now damage the children's case more than help it, made the decision alone, without consulting her, the way he had made every decision meant to protect people from the cost of loving him. He came to her that evening with a letter of dismissal already written, and the particular stillness of a man executing his own oldest habit. "I am sending you away, Miss Winslow, not because you have failed, because Reginald has made your presence a weapon against the children, and I will not let anyone use you to take them from me." His voice did not waver, though his hands, she noticed, would not quite hold still. "I have arranged a position and a reference that will follow you anywhere in England. It is the only thing left I can give you that does not cost the children everything." "You are doing it again," Frances said, and for the first time in 7 months her own composure broke. Grief and fury tangled together in her voice. "You have decided in advance that keeping me will cost you, so you are ending it yourself before it can. You did this with every governess before me, Your Grace, and you are doing it with me now, and calling it protection does not make it anything other than what it has always been." She stood very straight, refusing him the comfort of her tears. "I built this house back into something that could hold 3 children's grief. I am not leaving because you have decided once again not to lose." He left the room without answering her, and she spent 3 days in a rented room in the village, believing she had lost the wager after all. Not to Reginald, but to the very habit she had spent 7 months trying to teach him out of. He came for her on the 4th day, in the rain, without a carriage, having ridden the distance himself rather than send a servant to fetch what he had sent away. He was soaked through and entirely without his composure when she opened the door, and he stood on the threshold of her borrowed room and said, "Roughly, I went to the schoolroom this morning to tell the children you would not be returning, and Henry asked me whether I had made you leave the way I made everyone leave, and I could not answer him, because he was right. And I have spent 4 days understanding that I would rather lose every argument I have ever made about protecting myself than lose you." He crossed the small room and took her face in both hands. "I do not know how to stop being afraid of losing people. I only know that sending you away has not made me any less afraid of it. It has only made certain I lost you regardless, which is the exact wager I have been rigging against myself for 2 years, and I am finished playing it. Stop apologising for being afraid, Your Grace," she said, unsteady, furious, and entirely undone by him all at once. "I do not need your regret. I need you to go back to Winterbourne and fight your cousin the way you have never once let yourself fight for anything you were afraid to lose." He kissed her then, in the doorway of a rented room with the rain still falling behind him, unhurried and devastating despite the urgency of it, the kiss of a man finally choosing to be undone by wanting someone rather than protecting himself from the wanting. And when he drew back, he pressed his forehead to hers and said her name. Just her name, as though it were the only steady thing left in the world. The Chancery hearing convened the following week, and it was Alistair who stood before the Commissioner and dismantled his cousin's petition point by point. The bribed footman's confession, secured by Frances herself in the days before, who had gone to the under-footman directly and offered him the truth over his own dismissal, and won it, the 7 months of Frances Winslow's unbroken service. Entered into evidence by 3 separate character references from neighbouring families she had quietly, methodically cultivated since October, precisely because she had known, long before Reginald filed a single paper, that a woman with nothing to prove her worth beyond one man's word was a woman easily discarded by a court that had never met her. Alistair spoke plainly, without artifice, of 2 years of grief he had mistaken for prudence, of a governess who had refused every excuse he built to drive her away, and of a cousin who wanted £20,000 far more than he wanted 3 grieving children safe. Reginald, confronted in open court with his own footman's sworn statement, attempted first bluster and then, when the Commissioner's expression did not yield, a hurried claim that the confession had been coerced, a claim that collapsed the moment the footman himself, present at Frances's own quiet insistence, stood and repeated the sum of money he had been offered and the precise date it had been paid. Reginald offered no further defence beyond a furious, flushed silence, and the Commissioner dismissed the petition before the session had run its second hour, remarking dryly, as he gathered his papers, that he had rarely seen a guardian's fitness so thoroughly proven by the very evidence meant to condemn him. The assembled room turned, as one, to watch the Duke of Winterbourne cross the floor to where Frances Winslow stood and take her hand in front of every witness who had come to see him lose his wards, choosing her instead, unmistakably, at whatever cost his pride demanded. The music room stayed unlocked after that. By midsummer, Henry's lullaby had become a nightly habit no one questioned. Thomas kept his brazier without supervision, and had not set a single unsanctioned fire in months, and Beatrice had begun teaching her small brother the shipping routes Frances had once taught her, a small, unbroken chain of care passing down through a household that had finally stopped expecting to lose everyone in it. Alistair proposed to her in October. Exactly 1 year after she had first crossed his threshold over a scattered stocking and a wager he had never expected to lose, in the music room, at the very pianoforte his brother's wife used to play, with all 3 children hiding, badly, behind the door to watch. "I told my steward you would be gone by spring," he said, kneeling with a ring he had carried in his coat pocket for a fortnight. Working up the courage. "You were still here at Michaelmas, and at midsummer, and you are here now, and I find I no longer have the first idea how to imagine a version of this house, or this life, without you standing in the middle of it, refusing to leave." Behind the door, Henry could not contain a delighted, badly muffled shriek, and Frances, laughing through sudden tears, said yes before he had even finished the question. Mrs. Fitch, who had once greeted Frances at the door with the weary sympathy reserved for lambs bound for slaughter, took to greeting her thereafter as though she had personally engineered the whole happy outcome, which Frances privately suspected the housekeeper half believed. The trunk that had once burst open in the drive on a stranger's first afternoon was retired to the attic, its contents long since absorbed into a life that no longer required a single travel case to hold everything she owned. A year later, the pianoforte no longer stood silent in an empty room, but rang most evenings with Beatrice's careful practising and Thomas's off-key singing, and Henry's small, delighted shrieking, while Frances, no longer governess, but duchess, though the children still called her by the name they had given her first, sat in the window seat where Alistair had once told her a dead woman used to. laugh at her husband's terrible voice, watching her own husband attempt, with equal and endearing tunelessness, to sing their small nephew to sleep. Reginald Ashcombe, they had heard, had removed to the continent under a cloud of debt and disgrace no family would any longer receive. His name a quiet byword in 3 counties for exactly the kind of greed he had tried to dress up as concern. Mr. Corbin, for his part, still occasionally reminded his Grace, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had lost a wager and never regretted it once, that £100 had never in his life been better spent than on losing it to Miss Winslow. Alistair had taken, more than once, to reminding Corbin in turn that the steward had been wrong about the fortnight, wrong about the spring, and wrong, in the end, about nearly everything he had once been so certain of regarding his own household, and that he, for his part, had never in his life been so grateful to lose an argument.